Hello, today our next visit to Brussels. Today we are subject of this talk will be shifting ground of permafrost. And the subject, I think, is very urgent, so it will be one in a series about this theme. And I would like already to give a floor to Edith Doove. She is our moderator, and she is a curator, she is a researcher, and she is working in different, very interesting transdisciplinary fields. So I will give floor to her, and welcome to Visit of Brussels.
Well, thank you. I will read an introduction. I will introduce our speakers of tonight. So we're talking about permafrost, which is not merely a climate indicator, but also a living and dying surface, one that holds stories, secrets, and signals for the future. Across the Arctic and subarctic regions, the frozen soil that has underpinned ecosystems, indigenous cultures, and scientific certainty for millennia is thawing. Permafrost, once considered a stable, unmoving archive of Earth's climatic history, is now in flux, collapsing both literally and symbolically under the weight of global heating. This transformation is not only geophysical, it's cultural, psychological, and political. Melting permafrost releases greenhouse gases, awakens dormant microorganisms, and disrupts traditional ways of life. But it also raises deeper questions about memory loss, resilience, and how we relate to our changing planet. In response to these urgent questions, Laser Talks Brussels brings together artists and researchers whose practices offer new ways of sensing and thinking through permafrost material and metaphorical transformations. And this talk doesn't take place in Gluon for nothing, but also in the framework of their ongoing collaboration with artist Laure Winants as part of the Studiotopia 2.0 program. So the participants are Elise Guillaume, an interdisciplinary artist, and Dr. Severin. Do I pronounce it correctly? Yeah. More or less. Environmental psychologists present, and they present the project Waves of Resonance, focusing on the sensory and emotional landscapes of marine sounds from the North Sea and the Arctic. The project investigates how listening can deepen human ocean connectedness and encourage pro-environmental attitudes. And then we have Laure Winants, a visual artist, and Anastasiya, who is on the screen, Halauniova, if I pronounce it correctly, a sociologist at Science Po. Laure presents her project Time Capsule, which is a project that investigates how permafrost regions are inscribed with disappearing knowledge systems, linguistic, cultural, and environmental, and how those losses echo far beyond the Arctic. And Anastasiya is going to talk about her research on the adaptation to permafrost thawing. So I will now read some bios so that you have some more information. So Elise Guillaume's interdisciplinary practice includes film, video, sound, photography, and sculpture, sometimes presented as immersive installations. The body is a central element in her work. It becomes a vessel for interpreting the interconnections between the beings that make up our world. Interested in the relationships between psychological states and environmental change, her work blends scientific research with personal introspection. This approach often takes her into the field, and also under the field, I would say, in the field, including to remote environments such as the Atacama Desert and the High Arctic. Through her work, she conceives of the intimate as environmental forms to explore the possibilities of a renewed relationship with the earth and one another. And Anastasiya, I do it in chronological order. Halauniova is an urban and environmental sociologist, currently based in Paris, informed by feminist theories of care. Her research examines the entanglements of political power and techno-scientific expertise around the instabilities of matter, focusing on how state actors and scientific experts engage with degrading environments and imagine life beyond promises of stability. Through ethnographic and historical methods, she traces how extractive logics collide with the fragility of more than human life. She's currently a postdoctoral researcher in the Department of Sociology at Sciences Po in Paris with the Bruno Latour Fund, working on unruly ground, rebuilding the Arctic urban in the age of climate crisis, a project exploring Russian and Norwegian settlements on Svalbard and Spitsbergen, in a time when stable frozen Arctic ground can no longer be taken for granted. She earned her PhD in sociology at the University of Amsterdam. Marine Severin is an environmental and clinical psychologist. She defended her PhD thesis recently, last year, November 6th, at the Inner Ocean campus in Ostend, investigating the relationship between coastal environments and mental well-being. And she's currently working as a therapist in Leuven and Brussels, as well as continuing research projects based on ocean and human health. And then Laure is a visual artist and researcher based between Paris and Brussels. Her practice is rooted in long-term transdisciplinary collaborations with scientific institutions, where she explores the intersection of art, ecology, and environmental data. She has worked alongside research teams such as the CNAS to investigate atmospheric pollution in the Pyrenees for the project Albedo 2021, the volcanology. Thank you. Laboratory in Iceland, to examine natural and anthropogenic phenomena like volcanic activity, phenomena in 2022, and the Norwegian Polar Institute on Polar Research through our ongoing project Time Capsule that you're going to introduce us to, that focuses on air bubbles with the prism of lights. And you have a new project, Future Fossils, for which you dive into the abyss, and in collaboration with the ocean, you translate it in color. She translates in color the deep time. Sorry. Her work focuses on the interdependence of living systems and the environment, seeking to amplify the voices of more than human entities, and through the use of sensitive materials, she creates evolutive installations, works that respond to their surroundings, including light, temperature, humidity, and atmospheric conditions. And I must say that your work is also shown widely internationally in all kinds of institutions, it's really fascinating. I had a big pleasure in looking at it, visiting your exhibition in Paris as well.
We missed each other.
Yeah, just in one day, but it was great to see it. It was a really nice experience. So all of them are now going to present their work or their research for about 10 minutes. And we start with Elise and Marine. So,
hello. I'm Elise Guillaume. I'm an artist and filmmaker. So I'll start by giving you a selection of different projects I've done over the past several years across film, video, photography, sound, and installation. And then I'll present our collaborative project with Marine called Waves of Resonance. So I'll start with Eventual Horizon, which is a short film in which I explore the parallels between the experience of grief for a loved one and ecological degradation in the Arctic. So I'm very interested, like Edith said earlier, in between the parallels between psychological states and environmental change. So I look at that through films, video, sound, and photography as well. So in Eventual Horizon, which was filmed in the Arctic, visually we see macro footage of the body blending with ice. We hear the sounds of melting ice as well, and we're guided by a voiceover that is quite exhausted by the emotional weight of these issues, but still holds on to hope for life as well. So it's a fluid yet fragmented narrative at the same time. So how can I rest while everything evaporates is a really important phrase in the film. To explore these relationships between psychological states and environmental change. So as you can see sea ice melting in the Arctic here. But then also I hold onto the sounds of birds, another essential phrase. So yes, Eventual Horizon looks at the relationships between grief and hope, but I really want to emphasize this element of hope which for me is codependent to grieving. So with this in mind, the film is really about facing the reality of ecological degradation head on, but looking at the life that we have lost, but cherishing that life. And then by doing so, we recognize the lives that we have lost, the extinction that is happening, but also the life that persists. And in that way is an act of hope as well. So in the Arctic here, you'll see that I spend a lot of time in the water. And also, I just want to say that Laure and I met in the Arctic when we went the first time. So in...
By accident or...
Yeah, accident. We met on the boat.
You have to do that.
We're in Belgium in the...
Yeah.
On the boat.
Yeah. And now here we are again.
Yeah, yeah.
But anyway, yeah, so as you can see, I spent some time in the water in the Arctic, in proximity to to icebergs and glaciers as well. And there I had the occasion to record the sounds of melting ice. So there I'm using hydrophone to record the crackling sound of ice. So it's essentially the sound of deep time evaporating in the atmosphere. So I also work with analog photography. So this is just to take you over a series of works called Bodies of Water. So this series of analog photographs depict various textures of the human body and states of water, from liquid to solid form. It is about solidarity across watery bodies, human and non-human alike. And the work in some way also enacts what theorist Estrida Neumanes says, which I think you might be familiar with too, what she calls hydrologics. So it's ways of knowing with water. So these images were also taken in the Arctic. Some of them are taken from the perspective of being in the water. So like you saw me earlier with the hydrophone, there I was taking images of small crevices of ice. And then here you see I'm holding seaweed. So those images that you just saw are actually developed with a seaweed-based developer. So it's an alternative to traditional chemical processes to process analog negatives, but also prints. And so this is seaweed that I found washed ashore on a beach in the Arctic. And I used it to develop the negatives and also the prints of these photographs. So here's just some images of the process. So on the left, you have the seaweed. In the middle, the process of making the developer and then the negatives. So this is just like an installation view of some of the works. But then also these photographs are also part of a wider installation which takes the form of being kind of halfway of a laboratory and a darkroom arranged with the seaweed in between the negatives. So the audience was really invited to come along and to look closely at these different elements which came to collaborate to create the works. So yeah, the fascination for seaweed and love for seaweed continues in this work too. So this is a series called Regenerate. It's a sculptural series made of steel, seaweed, more particularly Fucus vesiculosus. So it's a type of bladderwrack, so intertidal brown seaweed, which you find in the North Sea. And it's been transformed into what I call seaweed skins. So essentially it's a type of biomaterial. So my work is really about, it thinks of the body is quite centered into the work, and it's really thinking about through the body, about our relationship with the more than human. So this is an installation view of Regenerate in my last show, Par le Corps, which was shown at La Chapelle Jeanne d'Arc Contemporary Art Center in France. I'll just play a time lapse of the work. So you see there's really work of the light coming through. It's an architecturally built series of sculptural works as well. And here a close-up of the seaweed skins. So some of them are sewn together. I'm really fascinated by their delicate yet malleable textures as well. And I'm really interested in this duality too, with this tension between fragility and resistance. So how are these made? So these seaweed biomaterials, seaweed skins as I call them, I forage both living and dead specimens of fucus. Then I boil them, melt them, cook them. These gestures for me represent gestures of domestic labor, but also gestures of care, after which this cooking recipe, let's say, of seaweed is then poured and then dries. It is then peeled and becomes a skin. As you can see there, I am peeling it off the mold. Yeah, so like I said, some of them is hand sewn together, and this is a process I also sometimes do with my mother. So yeah, regenerate, tombs, seaweed, skin. It's a work about working with seaweed into the species' metabolic cycles, life, death, and regeneration. Again, here exploring the relationships between grief and hope, our bodies and the ocean in a time of climate crisis. Currently, I'm working on a new film project called Within from Below. And it starts from this question, where does the frequency of the body go when it dies? So Within from Below is a short film that explores the relationships between our bodies and the ocean through sounds, from both a scientific and metaphysical perspective. It is part of an ongoing series of films, so like Eventual Horizon, about climate, grief, and hope. It is centered on the industrialized part of the Belgian North Sea coastline, so it's a very busy area. And the film interweaves anthropogenic noise and sounds of coastal landscapes, so including sounds that are generally inaudible to the human ear, along with sensorial imagery where bodies and water merge in really fluid textures. So again, that relationship between the human and more than human. We'll also have scientific insights of underwater noise pollutions in dialogue with transcendental perspectives on the therapeutic potential of particular frequencies on our physical forms. So we'll talk about the therapeutic side a bit later on with marine too. And our physical forms, which are two bodies of water like the ocean and the living beings that inhabit it. So the film focuses on the work of the acoustic team of the Flanders Marine Institute at WLIS, which is an ongoing collaboration ever since the project Waves of Resonance. So Waves of Resonance is a research-led project which we developed in collaboration with Marine, who is here, but also with Claire Pastorices, who's an acoustic ecologist. Essentially, it's a 16-minute surround soundscape incorporating marine sounds recorded from the North Sea and the Arctic above and below water. It includes sounds that are typically inaudible to the human ear, and by doing so, it hopes to enact deep emotions, such as awe, transcendental emotions such as awe, that might enact pro-environmental attitudes by strengthening our connection to the ocean. So in terms of the sounds included, there are anthropogenic sounds. So these are human-induced sounds, such as boats or pile driving that we have in the North Sea. We also have biological sounds, such as the sounds of sperm whales and dolphins in the Arctic region. We also have geophonic sounds. So this includes the sound of melting sea ice. So sea ice is what you see here. But also glaciers and the sound of waves. The sound recordings of Waves of Resonance were made using a variety of microphones, including geophones. So here you see I am recording with a geophone in the Arctic to record the vibrations emitted by ice and snow. And then on the right, I'm using different microphones simultaneously, which I like to call tentacular listening, because you hear different textures at the same time. And then in parallel to this, like I was saying earlier, working with the WLIS acoustic team, it includes recordings from the North Sea, so essentially noise pollution. So here you see acoustic gear being deployed into the North Sea. And what happens is that this gear is deployed for several months, and then it is retrieved afterwards. So here you see the acoustic gear coming back full of barnacles. And then the WLIS acoustic team gathers the data and processes this Of course, the North Sea is a very busy area, so there is a lot of noise pollution in this region. So, like we said earlier, Waves of Resonance is about researching the psychological impact of listening to marine sounds. So the edit of the sound piece was informed by this research. So the way the study was conducted and co-led with Marine was through a series of workshops in the UK, Belgium, and France. The first workshop happened at the Royal College of Arts with art students from contemporary art practice, so a very particular sort of setting. So these are images from the workshop. And then in the second workshop, which we gave during the Day of Science at the Flanders Marine Institute of Liz, we had a more general public, but people who were already having a connection and an interest to the ocean. And in the workshops, participants were invited to listen to the sound piece, but also fill in questionnaires before and after, so that we could quantify the effect of the sound piece in terms of the impact on their stress, their mood, and their connection to the ocean. They were also invited to take part in a multiple choice questionnaire to recognize and learn about specific sounds of the ocean recorded from above and below. And then at the end of the workshops, they also received a list of pro-environmental actions locally in which they could take part in. And the third workshop was led at La Chapelle Jeanne d'Arc Contemporary Art Center in Thouars, where I just had a solar exhibition, which was quite a different context to the previous two. So that was interesting as well for the research. So within this context, Waves of Resonance was presented in the crypts of a chapel, so already in a dark space, only with dim lighting coming from one of the regenerate pieces, which you saw earlier with the seaweed. So there was one sculpture at the end of the crypt, which was the only source of light. The sound piece was presented across 5 speakers, so it was a very immersive experience. And also the mix of the sound piece was made in situ, so in line with the architecture of the space. So now you'll listen to an excerpt of 2 minutes. I encourage you to close your eyes if you want. So yeah, that was a short excerpt of 2 minutes of a 16-minute sound piece. And there you heard the sounds of melting icebergs. So that's that very crackling sound. So it's basically, yeah, deep time evaporating into the atmosphere as it goes. And I always question, okay, this evaporates. There's a form of grief to it. But this water is evaporating and still there. It's still contained. It's still with us in the world somewhere. It's just changing form. You've also heard the sound of melting sea ice, which is the kind of whispers going like that. And then you also heard geophonic sounds of vibrations of the earth. So that's the like very low bass. Yeah, and then where can I? There we go. I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge the partners who supported and keep on supporting us and making this possible. So it's a project that was developed during the European Marine Board's Embracing the Ocean residency. And it's continuing, it's ongoing. And yeah, just to finish off, I invite you, if in case you come to London, I have an exhibition happening soon. And if you have questions, please feel free to get in touch. So now I'll pass on to Marine to talk more about her work and the research behind waves of resonance.
Okay, hello. So I'm just gonna briefly present my research first in general, and then present also the more research side of waves of resonance, so the project that we did with Elise. So the main theme of my research is ocean and human health. It's a emerging interdisciplinary topic, and basically it looks at the interactions between ocean health and human health. As there is more and more evidence that, of course, the two are inextricably linked. So before, the interactions were mostly looked under a negative standpoint, but recently we observe an evolution of research that look more into the positive interaction. So, for example, how us humans can positively impact the health of our ocean and how the ocean positively impacts our health. So the main research focus was looking into how the ocean impacts our health. And numerous studies already show that living close to the coast or being exposed to the coast has a beneficial effect on our physical and mental well-being. So what I then looked at was why that is and what are the underlying mechanisms. So research already suggested three mechanisms. You have the mechanism of mitigation, which means that the coast benefits well-being by reducing exposure to environmental stressors, such as traffic noise, heat, and air pollution. Then we have the mechanism of insuration, which means that the coast benefits well-being by promoting psychological and physical resources. So we know that being by the coast increases your rate of physical activity, and it also provides more opportunities for pleasant social interactions. Then we have the mechanism of restoration, which means that the coast enables to recover from depleted cognitive and physiological capacities. In other words, it means that when we're at the coast, our stress level and mental fatigue reduces and gives us a feeling of calmness and revitalization. In addition to these mechanisms, we know that the coast also offers an immersive and multi-sensorial space that enhances our well-being, such as through the sound of waves or its vast, expansive horizon. Also important is that the coast is linked to a specific kind of cultural narrative where it's typically perceived as a place of leisure and healing. So these perceptions also likely influence why it affects our well-being. And so if we look at this, we can identify different dimensions, so environmental, social, physical, and cognitive. But what about the more emotional dimension? So this is what I looked more into. So I focused on three different environmental states that have been shown to positively affect our well-being and that potentially were linked to the coast. So the first one is the emotion of awe. So awe is typically triggered when we perceive something as bigger than ourselves. And this makes us feel more small and humble. It's expressed as either fear or fascination, depending on whether we manage to wrap our heads around what we are seeing, basically. Then we have nostalgia. Nostalgia is a sentimental longing for the past. It's a mixture of loss and happiness, and it's a feeling of bittersweet. And then we have nature connectedness, which expresses as a deep cognitive and emotional bond to the natural world. So I focused on these three emotions that could be induced by the coast through its aspects of vastness, grandeur, the feeling of timelessness you can have at the coast, and also its very diverse natural elements. Very brief, my main results was that I found that being exposed to the coast does trigger these emotions of awe, nostalgia, and nature connectedness, and that these emotions then help reduce our boredom, our worry, our stress, and increases happiness. And it also leads to better emotion regulating strategies. I invite you to, if you're interested to read more, you can find my thesis or the different papers that are published. But importantly is that the majority of studies investigating the relationship between the coast and well-being are based on a visual medium and not an auditive medium. So that's why it was really interesting to work with Elise to see what would be the auditive, the effect of the auditive stimuli of the coast on our emotions and well-being, as also listening to marine sounds that are typically inaudible to the human ear most likely induce a sense of fascination and connection with the ocean. So then that's why we worked on waves of resonance, which had several research questions. So basically, to what extent does listening to this sound piece affect well-being and emotions? How do people actually perceive the different sources of sounds that they could hear? To what extent does the workshop affect ocean literacy? So ocean literacy is a global term that defines how connected we feel to the ocean, what attitudes we may have, and what kind of ocean-friendly behaviors do we have. And then finally, also looking into what level of knowledge do people actually have regarding ocean sounds. So as Elise mentioned, we used questionnaires and also group discussions. More specifically, we had a questionnaire before listening to the sound piece and one right after. In the questionnaire before, so we measured the participants' socio-demographics, how frequent they visit the coast, and what are their initial level of connection to nature. We measured the frequency of ocean-friendly behaviors and their momentary state of well-being, as well as their emotions. Then after listening to the sound piece, we again measured their well-being and emotions, and also how connected they felt to the ocean at that time, what kind of attitudes they have towards ocean sustainability, and what are their intentions towards ocean-friendly behaviors. So that was during the workshop. And at the end of the workshop, as Elise mentioned, we gave a list of environmental actions. So these are more global, not necessarily towards the ocean. And we also gave international and local-based initiatives. So this was tailored to each region where we did the workshop. And we did this because then 3 weeks to 1 month after the workshop, we sent a third questionnaire to participants where we asked them what kind of actions did they undertake towards these initiatives that we shared with them. Did they, for example, look up these initiatives online? Did they follow on social media? Did they make a donation? Did they volunteer? So yeah, we were curious to see that as well, and their overall frequency of pro-environmental actions and ocean-friendly behaviors. If the workshop was of a longer formats. We included a group discussion where, after listening to the sound piece, we asked then participants whether any specific sounds affected them, if there were sounds that they couldn't distinguish being anthropic or biologic, any particular sounds where they could identify the source, and yeah, how they felt about it. I'll keep it short. Also what they thought of noise pollution and how it affected our ocean. So this was referring to the specific sounds they heard, and we asked them to try to guess the source of that sound. And then some preliminary results. So these are just based on the first 2 workshops. So we had 50 participants. There is some extent diversity in terms of age, gender, and nationality. Then, if you're interested in some preliminary results, we see that there are positive changes in their well-being in terms of reduction in stress, and in negative mood, and an increase in low arousal positive mood, which means feelings of calmness, peacefulness, and relaxation. Then we see, after listening to the sound piece, yeah, they have a somewhat high level of awe experience and ocean connectedness. Ocean-friendly behaviors, whether the workshop affected their ocean-friendly behaviors, we don't see a significant difference. But then again, these results are preliminary. They don't take into account differences in terms of workshops, sociodemographics, and also the sample size remains quite small. So we expect that the results evolve as we collect more data. Yeah, maybe one last interesting thing is that the sounds that people could not guess were mostly biological. So, for example, seals. So people confused it with like a vessel impact on sea ice. But sounds that were most correctly guessed were anthropic, such as boats. Yeah, and then what's next? So we will we will further progress in analyzing the data and interpreting the results. We also aim to look more into the therapeutic potential of the sound piece by doing workshops in clinical settings as well. And depending on the results, look into potential reinforcers or barriers of how the sound piece affects ocean lives.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you. So, time capsule. So I'm going to talk to you about 2 current research, one in the Arctic and involve permafrost, and the other one is called fossils and and it's happening in the ocean. So for time capsule, I joined a different group of research in the Arctic a couple of years ago. And we did different type of ice core drilling, and we look at glacier ice, sea ice, and permafrost. The first experiment I did was with glacier ice. So I was working with the Norwegian Polar Institute. I joined their research boat 3 years ago, right after the residency where we met. I joined them. And I stayed 4 months. I was supposed to stay with them two weeks, and then the collaboration happened very well, and so I decided to stay a little bit longer. The group was very pluridisciplinary. There was an oceanographer, glaciologist, aerologist, marine bioacoustician, so a lot of different fields. And I got, we talked a lot about air bubble at some point, and I decided to focus my research on air bubble for 3 years. So the better way to look at air bubble while doing ice core is to cut the ice core in thin ice section.
Yeah.
And what I did is that when we did the cut, I would use the thin ice section as prism and optic. So I use different, in my work, I use different methodology from science, from photography, and I mix and I merge them. So here I would use what I call spectrogram. I will make spectrogram out of spectrophotogrammetry. So what kind of instrument using light can observe invisible matter. So for example, here what I did is like on the drawings here, I use the thin ice section as a prism, as optic. The light goes through and give us a part of a spectrum that's going to change depending on the air composition, on the bubble composition. So the idea is how could we study with the prism of color the chemical composition trapped in time. Okay. So we went back to 1,000,000 years ago, and I would do the exact same protocol every 200 years. So what you can see here is actually a fragment of time through the prism of light.
You're showing actually the deep time that you were talking about as well.
So this is the so it's called time capsule because we are traveling back in time from deep time to nowadays interaction and to anticipation narrative. We are in the group. There's also linguists that are working right now on anticipative narrative, and you will see ice and the permafrost, and the glacier part is on the deep time. So time reveals light. So we're going back in time with the prism of light, and we are studying what does color means here. So we are with the Norwegian, we are actually understanding that the pink magenta colors is methane.
Yeah.
So we have a portrait of each time. And the yellow part is radioactivity. So this is synesthesia. So we are translating gases into color and understanding what's happening in the atmosphere, because everything that's happening.
I'm going to ask you already a small question here, because did that give new perspectives for the scientists, what you were able to show this way? Or?
So we are going back and forth. So I'm sending them samples.
Yeah.
And they're sending me like data, and we are going back and forth into the community.
Exactly. Yeah.
So the idea is that everything that's happening on Earth, it's crystallized somewhere, either in the deep ocean, either in the ground, and everything that's in the air is going to be stuck in time. And we are leaving traces, and those are the traces from 1,000,000 years ago. Yeah. So what we are studying is it's synesthesia, but it's also like what happened at that time, and we are like going back to the history with the prism of color. So in this project there's a lot of layers, different layers, but that's the glacier part. Yeah. So what's the story of time? We did also a work with my colleague Patrick Blanchard called Words from a Tongue We're Losing, where we work with linguists and we attribute words. So each air bubble are words from a glacier tongue we're losing. What if the glacier was as an hyper object? Yeah, as a hyper object, or our ancestry is word is slowly melting from a tongue we didn't have yet the keys to understand what's happening. So there's multi-layers, but I'm going to keep it short and try to get to the... so this is a little bit the practical. So imprinting time with the prism of light. Those are big, like 110 on 160 big format. They're analog photography, color photography. So one piece of ice is one time is one piece of paper. This is the future part of the project. So this is the thin ice section that, as I told you, when we drill the ice core, we have thin ice section, and then we are studying the structure of the crystal and the color, and depending on the form, the shape, they will tell us how does the crystal is going to evolve in time, in the future. So we are looking at information in 200, 300 years from now, and how the ice is going to melt in the future. So, and you can see the air bubble. You don't see it very well, like, you don't see air bubble a lot in my work, but we talk about it all the time. So this is the thin ice section. The second ice we were studying is the sea ice. So for this, so for each type of ice, we use different instruments depending on the optical properties of the glacier ice. We use the optic, we use spectrophotogrammetry because it was a beautiful object for the refraction of ice. Here, the salt in the sea ice, the salt is so present that it's not possible to work on the optic. So what I did is that I work on the matter reaction. So what I did is I use the film, 4x5-inch film, and that I place inside of sea ice core. And with the process of melting, there's a reaction between the gelatin and the air bubble. They will react to one another and will crystallize. And actually, the form and the shape of the crystallization and the color is going to give us information to what was inside of the air bubble. So now we're studying the color. For example, this one is more blue and this one is more gold, yellowish. And we're trying to understand what happened at that time in the sea ice. The sea ice
develop the techniques while you're going.
Yeah. So as I told Ramona 2 days ago, the subject is going to come first, and then I'm going to see which form it's going to take depending on what I need, what is more meaningful, depending on the research. So for example, here, the salt was so present, we needed a reaction, to do a reaction with something. Here I use film because the gelatin is perfect and crystallize the air bubble. Otherwise, it's just going to go. So this is also a portrait of time, younger time, because sea ice is very, you cannot go back in a million of years with the sea ice. It melts and it's reshaped every year, like permafrost, but I will go, permafrost change can be liquid and ice again. So that's the sea ice parts. And now the permafrost. So what happened with the permafrost? So I did the research right after sea ice. It worked. Permafrost is full of mud and a lot of information. The optical properties were not very good to work as an optic. So I did the reaction again on another type of film. So this is big, large format analog film. And I did the same experiment. I placed, so we did a drilling of permafrost in the Arctic. I conserved and I kept all the ice core. And we did the experiment where I placed the film inside of the permafrost ice core, and will the melt, there is colors appearing. So we are going back and forth studying. But in this case, there's different color and different form and shape.
Yeah.
So this was quite a surprise to me also, to have so much information. So we still need some time to kind of understand what's linked to what. So this is still ongoing. So I cannot tell you today that this is
It's another tongue to learn.
It's not. We are trying to understand this language, but the translation is not. It takes some time. But so this is the permafrost series. So different experiments. I will go a bit faster to talk about future fossils if
you can.
Yeah.
That would
Okay.
be great.
So I work on the ice. I'm still working and trying to analyze the data now on sound and different other layers. Meanwhile, I joined different research vessel, working on the ocean. It's a continuation of time capsule, but it's another field work also, but it's quite similar. So, as I told you, first the subject, and then I will try to understand what will be the better form or shape to the research. And for this case, we decided to, what if everything that's happening in the air bubble, what happened in the ocean? What are the future fossils we're going to create in the future time? Everything that's happening in the air is actually happening in the ocean, and depending on the different tide and current, you have a lot of information to a lot of things that happen in the ocean. So we created a display that could react. So it's an acid and light sensitive display that react into color in everything that's happening in the ocean. So the idea is to imprint or to make a portrait of ecosystem interaction in the ocean. So between the water, the chemical water composition and the environment. For example, kelp forest, or if we have corals, what would be this interaction? So this is the display for now. So it's a merge between pH paper and photosensitive paper. So it actually, the problem with the pH paper is that the data is very short. But here the good thing is that the light is gonna fixate the process. So the idea is to dive into the water column, and we decide different spot where to place the display, depending on what we are looking for, and in different field work.
Can I ask you a question again? So it's a bit mixed, but
Yeah.
I think, because it's obvious that you're diving without air.
Yeah.
Is that done to not disturb, or do you want to have a closer contact with?
That's freedom also, and using my body as my own instrument.
Yeah.
The idea is that the less I have around me, the less I disturb. I don't leave any trace, and I'm totally fluid in I'm totally free, and I'm not disturbing anything.
And you knew already how to do that.
But I'm learning. So for each
Okay.
project, you can learn how to react with your own body. Also, like for example, in the Arctic, it was quite challenging also to work in the Arctic. You need to think about, battery-less material. You need to think about a lot of things. And here for the project, the idea was, we need to dive to a certain point, and I need to learn how to do it. And I need to learn how to do it without extra material. Because if you dive with the tank and everything, you need a boat, you need people, you need, it can be very, it depends on your level. But for me, it works very well like this. And I'm very conscious of the ecosystem also around. So that's good. But it's a process. We are learning. I'm never alone diving. I always need to be with somebody. If I'm alone, then I text, I'm here for an hour. I give the localization, and I put my phone under my car, and then I will dive. But usually I'm not on my own, so that's good. And so I dive in different sites for now, in different water ecosystem. Also very interesting to understand the ecosystem from the water. So I'm placing. So I start the project with the Tara Foundation. We are still working together on this and evolving the project like side by side with the researcher. This is how it looks like when I dive. So for now I dive. This is like 20 meters more or less, and I can stay 2 minutes. So I reached my goal recently. So I'm very happy about it. So the idea is that I need time to unfold the display, to check the turbidity of the water. So it's like you check the light, how much light, and I calculate everything. And then I pack up, I go up, and then I need to reveal with water the result. And now we are, as I did with the other research, understanding what's the color and which form, what does that say what is it telling us? So here is an example of one of the show. We have so here you have all the color here that we're doing. It's so we are going from we are getting closer to the seaside, to Kotor. So we did 10 stops with the research vessel, and every stop I did 3 dives. And now we are understanding like what is happening to Kotor. And we are analyzing. So we have the samples from the Tara Foundation, and we are crossing the data from my paper. So how do we work together with the light? In this show, in 104, what I did is that on the wall, everything on the wall is from the expedition, and everything on the table, it's I placed the paper that we created in this big box with water from the exhibition, and this is going to crystallize the time frame of the exhibition. So you will have a direct intervention of the people on the display.
Okay.
So this is a crystallization of time and the chemical time in the show. So depending if it's winter, summer, depending on of a lot of things, you will have a different. And I show you the results. This is the result. So it's going to crystallize and change color also.
Okay.
So I've been showing. So for each show, I have a different paper, and then it crystallize. So this is one type of the result also.
I don't want to cut you too short, but
but I'm done.
Aware of the time, so
that was it.
Thank
of
you
course.
very much. Now we have to go somehow to Anastasiya. If you're ready, Anastasiya.
Yeah, I am. Do you hear me well?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Actually, I also wanted to say thank you, Laura, so much for inviting me, and thank you, Laser Talks, for accepting a boring sociologist at an event that is mostly about experimental methods of visualizing changes in the climate and permafrost. So I'm afraid I will be the least visually inspiring participant today. But since I'm a sociologist, then I will do what I do professionally, tell stories and talk about people's practices and perceptions and interpretations. And actually, I wanted to start with the title of our event, Shifting Grounds of Permafrost. It captivated me, and I wanted to pause and first ask, where does this phrasing comes from, and what story does it tell about permafrost? And then I will get into my research. So if we look at how permafrost is currently talked about in the news or scientific reports, the story about it usually goes as follows. So for a long time, permafrost, which is this frozen ground, was stable, reliable. It was even considered eternal. That's where the name comes from, permanently frozen ground. In Russian, the language that I speak, it literally means eternal frost. So the temporality of eternity is very important for its naming. And so the story from the news says to us that only recently has permafrost begin to thaw and degrade. And when it degrades, it creates different kinds of havoc. So you see here some screenshots from the news from different years. So what kind of havoc does it create? So these are some screenshots from the not recent and recent news, right? So this is what the news tells us. Permafrost started to thaw and degrade, and when it degrades, it creates different kind of troubles for us, from buildings that collapse, but the buildings used to stood firm, to pipelines that crack, but these pipelines before functioned without problem. So this is a very powerful story because it creates a sense of doom and apocalypse. And this is something that two brilliant scholars of permafrost, a historian PhD and a geographer Charlotte Wrigley, wrote about in the last few years. So what disappears in this story is that even before climate change put permafrost in the headlines, permafrost actually was never truly stable. Permafrost frozen soil has always been a very dynamic, very heterogeneous, so it's never the same in any place, and a very complex medium. It has been highly sensitive, reacting to very different external forces such as shifts in the temperature of the air, in the vegetation of the soils, in the patterns of snow and rainfall, in soil moisture. But even more so, it has been reacting to human activities such as construction, mining, building of infrastructures. When we do these kind of things, it inevitably disturbs the thermal balance of permafrost and makes it behave in unpredictable ways. So the question that in my work I kind of started being fascinated by is, how is that for so long many of us assume that permafrost is perfectly stable, even eternal? How did it become this political and legal, invisible, anonymous materiality, if it ever was? And these are the questions that I ask in my sociological research, and I believe these questions matter because they help us to understand how permafrost was understood and treated before it became centralized in the news in the last few years. So these questions help us to see permafrost in a longer perspective, which I'm trying to do, and trace how it became also very important for different political processes and economic projects in the Arctic throughout the 19th, 20th, and 21st century. So what I mostly focus on is to show how throughout the 20th century, for example, different actors developed tools and strategies in order to control permafrost, to conquer permafrost, and to make it appear as if permafrost is a very stable foundation for any kind of economic activity that these actors were unfolding. And particularly, I'm interested in resource extraction, which led us to the mess we're living through today. So I explore those issues in my project, and you already mentioned it. It's called Unruly Ground. I do it at Sciences Po in Paris. And here I wanted to thank Bruno Latour Fund that sponsors my postdoctoral position and my research that I'm conducting in a very particular place that I chose in order to investigate permafrost and politics of it, which is the Norwegian Arctic archipelago of Svalbard. And you see it here on the map. I'm sure most of you've heard what is Svalbard and where it is, but still maybe I would give you a little introduction and why Svalbard is so interesting. The first reason is that it has a very unique geographical and geopolitical position. So a century ago, there was a document signed called Svalbard Treaty, and this document allows multiple nations to conduct activities on Svalbard. So basically, even though it's a Norwegian archipelago, throughout the 20th century up until today, we can see very different research groups, different nationalities, and even Soviet Union being present on Svalbard and conducting their not only scientific activities, but also economic activities. So it's a hub for very, very different national contexts meeting in one place. So beyond that, because of its position and this unique international context, Svalbard is currently treated as a kind of a place where you can study not only climate of the past, but also the climate of the future. You can draw it as a proxy for planetary future. And this is where such infrastructural projects like Global Seed Vault come from. So Global Seed Vault stores seeds from around the world in a situation if there is a global catastrophe and humans would need to rely on those seeds. So basically, Svalbard is a very interesting place for these reasons, but beyond that, it was a place for extractivist activities for Norwegian state and Soviet state and today Russia to come there in order to extract coal. And that's where permafrost was also important because it was this geological context for where the coal was extracted from and where the settlements for the coal miners were built. So in my research, I focus exactly on this kind of international comparative context. I look at two settlements, Longyearbyen and Barentsburg. Longyearbyen is the Norwegian town. It's an administrative center of the archipelago. It's inhabited by about 2,000 people, citizens from across the world. Barentsburg is very different. It's a very small village of around 300 people from Russia, Ukraine, and Tajikistan, and it's an active coal mining town. Both towns are built directly on permafrost. Both share the fragile Arctic ecosystem, and even though they are located just 50 kilometers away from each other, they actually represent a very different historical and political project. So that's my fascinations with them, is that through these two towns, by looking at them, I can see how capitalism and communism, Norwegian state power, Soviet and Russian state power, and resource extraction strategies that they had, they all met and confronted the reality of permafrost. So these two locations help me to ask and answer two main questions that drive my interest in the topic. First, how did Norway and the Soviet Union and today Russia pursued their extractivist and also scientific activities despite all the difficulties that permafrost poses as a very hard, complicated, opaque, and unpredictable ground? And second, I also look contemporary, of course, at these processes of permafrost thawing, and I want to understand how those towns and their residents adapt to the challenges of thawing permafrost today. So I know that answering these two questions will take a while and definitely more than an hour and more than 10 minutes. So I wanted to draw your attention just to a few little insights that I gathered from my research around the issue of adaptation today. So I will start with Barentsburg. In Barentsburg, the Russian mining town, permafrost degradation does not take a very spectacular, dramatic form as the news report describe it maybe in other locations. And instead, residents witness permafrost degradation not directly, but through slowly emerging and growing cracks. So these cracks run through foundations, walls, roads, staircases, and ceilings of buildings they live and work in. And one such wall that you see here on the slide has become kind of a canvas where Barentsburg locals write down their names and their height in order to imprint their existence in this town. So given the pervasiveness of these cracks and different kind of damage that is taking place in Barentsburg, maintenance and repair of buildings is paramount in this town. So when I spoke with local builders and maintenance workers, they told me that their main job is basically not to build new stuff, but to maintain what already exists in a working enough condition. There is no urban development plan, so there is no urban expansion in Barentsburg, no new roads, no new buildings or infrastructure, but builders and maintenance workers, they are repairing what's already there, keeping it functioning enough so that it doesn't fall apart immediately in the coming month or a few months. And that's what people tell me, that's the goal. We try to hold on to what we've got. So the real challenge for their job is not exactly the Arctic climate, but actually the lack of material maintenance of the town's buildings and infrastructures throughout the years. You see the image of some of the cracks and also the residential building on permafrost. And these buildings were built in the 70s, and since then they haven't been repaired. So what place does permafrost degradation have in all of this? Residents agree, and they know about permafrost degradation. They agree that permafrost contributes to this kind of buildings collapsing and cracking, but at the same time, for them, they interpret it as the human factor is more important. What do they mean by that? So according to the locals, permafrost requires constant care. You have to pay attention to the thermal regime of permafrost, not only when you construct a building, but also when the building continues to live throughout years and decades. So builders need to anticipate how permafrost will be affected by very different forces, and maintenance workers need to handle those kind of relationships and processes throughout the long run of the building or infrastructure. And this means that they need to pay attention to vegetation, to snow, to rain, and whether the water is leaking from the pipes because it can thaw permafrost underneath, and so on and so on. And more than that, residents do not necessarily interpret cracks in buildings as coming from permafrost degradation or as something that is climate related, but they often see it as a failure of care. So they interpret it as a result of limited resources that the state has. The state simply lacked the means to maintain infrastructure for them, and so they understand it as a sign of a deeper structural neglect of their buildings and their lives, not only of permafrost per se. And here I would like to shift very fast to Longyearbyen, the Norwegian town, because there actually the processes and the practices contrast really sharply with Barentsburg. So unlike in Barentsburg, Longyearbyen is a settlement that is oriented towards growth. Even though the town cannot expand geographically, it's quite complicated. The Norwegian state and the municipality emphasize that the town must grow vertically. So you need to build bigger, faster, and hopefully cheaper, which also, because of the weight of the growing building, will affect permafrost underneath. And that is why all the structures that were already affected by permafrost degradation, they're currently being replaced and repaired, and more buildings are kind of awaiting this kind of weight of renewal. So in Longyearbyen, residents and maintenance workers interpret permafrost differently. They see cracks in the walls and other signs of damage, and they almost always read it as evidence of climate change. So not as lack of maintenance or lack of care like in Barentsburg, but climate change per se. As many residents told me, climate is changing, and so now permafrost is no longer stable. Architects and engineers I talked to also complicated this picture. They told me about the history of Longyearbyen, and they shared that unlike Barentsburg, where buildings were elevated on really long piles, which creates the kind of longer durability for a building in permafrost, even if the ground shifts and changes. In Longyearbyen, the piles are quite short, just a few meters deep, and also they're made of wood. So this makes buildings and infrastructures much more sensitive to any kind of change in permafrost. And when I spoke with a state official in Longyearbyen who was responsible for managing the town's properties, he explained that these buildings were constructed on these short piles because at the time of the construction, let's say 1960s, no one was expecting permafrost to lose its stability in Longyearbyen. So much of the town's construction was not designed with permanence in mind. It was supposed to be a short-lived settlement, and lives of people there were supposed to be short in a way that people come and go all the time. So it was carried out before kind of stricter regulations came in, and under the assumption that the building would only need to exist for a limited amount of time. And this shows us that in the past, the town was imagined with a very different timeline in mind. Buildings were designed for immediate use. And today, as my research shows, the sense of time is reimagined because Longyearbyen is being recast and re-narrated as something that should exist for as long as possible. So we need to build on deeper piles, engineers suggest. So this logic is very straightforward. The deeper the pile, the more stable the building should be in the future, and the more secure the imagined future of Longyearbyen will be. So here, actually, what is interesting is that the question about permafrost and climate change is translated into engineering solution and the question, how deep should the foundation go? So, with this all in mind, what do we learn from the small vignettes of my research on Svalbard? And I wanted to emphasize a few things for our conversation. First, I would like to recognize that permafrost was never been a passive layer of lifeless soil, and it was never imagined as perfectly stable and eternal ground, actually. Life on permafrost has always meant negotiating with it being very vital and very dynamic. But the thing is that throughout the 20th century, those negotiations with permafrost were mostly dominated by very powerful nation states such as Soviet Union or United States that also build a lot on permafrost because they tried to conquer and control its behavior. Second, I think we need to pay much closer attention what it actually means to live with permafrost. because it will reveal to us that life on permafrost requires really a very particular type of care. It's a constant care, it's a constant attuning to the processes and relationships that permafrost has with very different forces. And these forces can be natural and environmental, like air temperature, but they also can be anthropogenic, such as extractivist activities and construction. So from that, we need to accept that permafrost is a rather fragile entity, not in a sense that it is weak, but in a sense that it always moves in relationships to other forces, so it responds to them. And so I want to suggest to take the practices of the people that I study with, and also other social scientists do research in the Arctic with residents in different geographical locations, and to think about permafrost as something that is not permanent and reliable, and now we're losing it, but something that has always been fragile and moving and was always shaped by different political priorities. So that would be my moral of my story.
Thank you very much, Anastasiya, and all of you for your very rich presentations, to which I'm now going to add a little and ask some questions. And then we will also have the possibility for the audience to ask questions. What is clear also from Anastasia's presentation is maybe also today's realization in general that life is fragile and always changing, and that for a very long time we just thought of the Arctic as permanent. And maybe it's also a sort of integral human need to have this stability. And in the past, in recent years, this has completely been swept under our feet, whether it's natural or political. We're living in strange times, a time of monsters, as we could say. So permafrost disappearing leads to changed perspectives about the current state of affairs, the past and the future. But it's not only the case in the Arctic, but also, for instance, in the Swiss Alps, where there's also normally permafrost disappearing, leading to avalanches. In Siberia, where you have these gas explosions. And one glance at the website of the Worldwide Fund for Nature can steep you immediately in a deep depression, because it makes clear how devastating the situation actually is. The summer Arctic sea ice is shrinking at 13% per decade, and overall the sea ice gets younger and thinner, and this accelerates the warming of the entire Earth and leads to rising sea levels, without even mentioning the consequences for Arctic wildlife or human inhabitants. But interestingly, when we're talking about deep time, once the Arctic was a subtropical sea with temperatures of 20 degrees about 55 million years ago. And in the late Pliocene, to book you with some other kind of terminology, about 3.4 million years ago, the global temperature was 2 to 3 degrees higher than it is now. And the first fossil record of the Parasemulus, a kind of giant camel, related to the llama, dates from that time, an animal that evolved during the Eocene 44 million years ago. And in fact, the soft, pliable feet of a camel that we need now associate with the desert was evolved in the Arctic, weirdly enough. So that gives a different kind of perspective as well. So whereas the climate changes back then were natural, we're now, of course, confronted with Anthropocene changes that make even more devastating and can add to the guilt that you are talking about as well, that we might have. Maybe not everyone, but somehow from your research I got that is also maybe talked about. But it's nevertheless interesting to see how different the Arctic was in the past. In our relatively short lifetime, we have become used to this cold, icy and snowy land stretches. I had to think of the word romantic sublime when you were talking about awe, where we sort of, on the one hand, have this human need for stability, but we also want to have this being struck by an immense landscape and being a bit afraid, but still safely behind in our home. So long snowy stretches roamed by polar bears, immediately a very romantic kind of view of the north. And so your research wants to show that the differences, wants to make us aware. And one of the things is, so we know that what is changing in the Arctic has an effect on the whole Earth. Anastasiya was talking about the global seed fault that was also threatened by permafrost. And so we thought that was a very stable building. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's a concrete building that you think will last forever, and that was threatened by permafrost as well. So nothing is basically stable. But apart from that, why the Arctic? What brought you to go there? Both of you, Elise and Laure, maybe.
For me, the research started with a fascination for air bubble. How can time travel within ice? It's invisible. You cannot see it, you cannot smell it, you don't have any. How this can travel from so long, and we still have information nowadays what was breathing in the atmosphere at that time. For me, this is like fascination and to have access to this information because
which you could only find in the Arctic.
No, we can find there's glacier in a lot of different places, but what I think is it's beautiful is how you work with this information nowadays, and that as human we tend to understand time from 2 generations before or 2 generations after. We're working with deep time. It's a whole time frame. We are working on geological time, we are working on glaciological time, and we are very, very tiny. So for me, this was a very interesting perspective also to work on those gigantic time frame. For example, you mentioned that the Arctic, how was the Arctic before? When I was hiking in the Arctic, we found fossils of leaves.
There was not a jungle, but it's kind of tropical wood.
And nowadays, when you walk in the Arctic, there's no trees and nothing. So just the fact of finding fossils leaf on it tells so much about the change, about how our life is super tiny, and we're part of all of it. And for me, getting close to air bubble, stories of the Arctic, meeting all those great researchers. Even though I said that we didn't meet there, but meeting all those researchers and all those stories about the Arctic, this is beautiful. And I think for me, telling story, listening to stories, and get close to this kind of field work is the only way also to get closer to the care. It's better understanding, better, because for example, the ocean, we don't have much. Our imaginaries as kids, or our ideas about the ocean is very restricted because we didn't grow up in it. So now protecting deep sea, the ocean, and acting against deep sea mining is very hard for us because those are the landscape we're not used to seeing.
It's completely abstract.
So I have the feeling, telling stories, getting closer to it, feeling the water, or feeling those, getting fascination out of those landscapes gonna help us to take care better of it. So I think that's the link between all this that got me in the Arctic, or that get me diving in the water, or is out of fascination, and I think also of how to better care.
And for you, Elise?
I'm just gonna continue on what you're saying, because I think we really share the same thing. It's really about love and joy, and celebrating life as well, and being part of this beautiful earth, and being there and learning from the ocean, like Laure said, from the glaciers. And I remember, so when we met in the Arctic, like probably the day when I had the most incredible moment of awe was the day I left all of my gear actually, and left everything on the boat, and we walked and we went to the top of this mountain, and we sat in the snow from each other, and we just meditated for 15-20 minutes, and then I opened my eyes and I saw the most pristine mountains across, the glaciers behind, and you see the birds flying, and it's like this very simple but truthful realization, like you are nothing, and at the same time you are everything. And we have a role, each of us, to be part of this amazing planet and to keep it healthy as well, and to take care, like Laure said as well. So yeah, like I think it's really about, I mean, as an artist, in terms of the work that I do, it's about, you know, conveying the harsh reality that is, there is disappearance, there is fragility, but it's also finding a way to share these experiences that I had on a personal level as well, in addition to the scientific aspect. It's about tapping back into human sensitivity, which I think that we've sometimes forgotten, going back into those emotions and appreciating them and celebrating them. And that's what I meant earlier as well in terms of grief. Grief is sometimes perceived as something very sad and negative, but actually I don't see it as negative at all. I think it's part of the reality, and hate, like perceiving grief as an act of hope is seeing the truth in what's happening, and it's a celebration of life as well. Not only the lives that have left us, but the life that is still there, and it's a way of being in the world that is actually quite joyful and full of light as well. So for me, it's about that too, and the Arctic gave me a lot of that. Yeah, so it still feels very present.
Yeah, in terms of your work, because there's two things. Effectively, in the video that I saw that you sent me to look at, you also talk about the fact that anxiety can actually then, in a strange kind of way, be positive in that whole process, about which I want to ask you in a minute a question. We also talked about your use of sound. So is that all? You said it can be by chance, but is that for you also a way of literally resonating, having this vibration, this feeling that you're just talking about, and bringing that across, or?
I'll answer the questions in two parts. So first, so you were talking about the sound piece waves of resonance, and earlier Marine in her presentation she spoke about the double facets of awe. So awe is like this amazing moment of grace, of you know, of grandeur, but then there's also the facet which is the other side, which is deep fear and anxiety. But those are two facets of awe, and they're very important, and they can really connect us to the ocean or the more than human. As well. So actually, I don't think anxiety is necessarily a bad thing. Repressing it is bad, but feeling it and seeing it for what it is actually not suppressing it, but making it a strength afterwards.
Okay.
So that's how I see it as well. I can alert, but then taking it in and processing it can lead to something more. And then for the other part of your question about the sound, so I come originally from a more visual background. But I've come to realize that sound does something that images do not, in a way, especially I'm not speaking of all images, of course, but we live in a world where we're consuming images constantly, a lot of violent images as well. And there's something which I've noticed is becoming quite dangerous, is that we're becoming desensitized to this violence. Because we have to we keep on being confronted to it. So in order to cope, there's like a psychological mechanism that's developing. And so in a way, sound is a way of addressing the body and emotions without visual reference. And so it's tapping back into those emotions as well. And so feeling through the sounds. And I would go even nearly to saying that listening is perhaps a step towards seeing again differently, learning to see again.
Yeah.
So yeah,
thanks. In terms of anxiety with yours, because you're talking about living near a coast or an ocean as something that can bring stress levels down, and I inadvertently had to think of the fact I live in Normandy, and recently it happens more and more often that the valleys break down, which causes a lot of anxiety. So nothing, but not really. In terms of waters rising, ocean levels rising, and coastal areas actually being damaged immensely everywhere. How does that feed into your research?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that really would require further research, and that's definitely a direction that I was thinking of going towards the end, of looking at the links between climate change and well-being and health, and how the impacts of the climate change affects also the way that the ocean benefits our well-being. So, like you mentioned, these kind of natural disasters in a way, and how do we then cope with that, or how does that make us change this initial perception that, okay, the coast is a beneficial place for us. I think that some coastal communities, no matter what, prefer to still live there. Like, it is their home, it is their whole life. So, yeah, basically, I wouldn't really know yet what to say about that. I think that's definitely.
Yeah, in terms of your research, I had also a completely different thought of the calming effect of looking at water, if it's not storming, and I imagine. Yeah. But is that somehow also related to the fact that we as humans exist for about 50 to 60% out of water, or is that a ridiculous remark?
No, I think that that's a really pertinent remark, that we come from the ocean and it's a part of us. So definitely this sense of like pulling us towards our roots in a way. But also what you mentioned, that if we get a feeling of calmness when it's only calm water. I think I once did an interview with someone who said that she actively went to the coast when it was storming, because it also helps to reflect the storm that is in us in a way, that we can see, okay, the sea also expresses its anger and its sadness, and that these, I feel also within me that it's okay to feel like this as well. Yeah, a bit like what Elise was saying, how this anxiety is a part of us as well.
Yeah. I have one last question, and then I would like to give the floor to the audience if they have any questions for Anastasiya, because I thought it was fascinating what you were saying about the cracks in buildings and how they were a sign of lack of care. And if you look at your research of all of you, well, you haven't been in the Arctic yet. No, but anyway, but the Arctic as a sort of metaphor, because cracks in buildings also occur a lot now in other parts of the world because of the changes in the weather, because of climate change. How do you see that, Anastasiya? I mean, again, sort of the anxiousness around that, like little signs that suddenly appear and make you aware of what is.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a fascinating thought. I think cracks are endlessly interesting as objects. And sociology is really bad with noticing something so small and temporary and seamlessly insignificant as a crack. But I was growing up in a country, kind of in a time where Soviet Union collapsed, in Belarus, where all your life, all your belongings, all your savings, even everything was either completely destroyed or cracked. And so people would learn to live with them, to repair them, to give to things another life by just doing this like temporarily fixings. And I think that's why when I arrived on Svalbard and I came to Barentsburg, the first thing that I've noticed was this pervasiveness of cracks in everything, and that so many people are dedicated. Their whole salary comes from handling the constantly appearing cracks. And I think indeed we should definitely see cracks as physical, as metaphorical objects that remind us of something else. They never speak just for the thing that you see, but also for some other processes. Like for people in Barentsburg, it's the lack of care that they feel when they look at the crack. They immediately think of the ways in which the Russian government changed its attitude toward the Arctic in the 90s and 2000s, and the town was abandoned, it was almost ghosted. And there were even times where people in Barentsburg did not have heating for a few days, or they did not have properly functioning infrastructure, which was really dangerous. So the crack is never just a crack. And in other locations, cracks might mean something entirely else, but they're always about things. It's a reminder of things falling apart, and maybe falling apart earlier than you expected, and also an invitation for certain kind of action and engagement with this thing. Either you let it grow and you observe it, or you react immediately. And I think those are the differences. I am super interested generally in kind of slowly unfolding of material infrastructures that are happening in different places. I did my research also a lot on degradation of buildings and patina and cracks in Poland and Lithuania and Belarus. But I think in the Arctic, it's particularly insightful because it's so much more. The crack in a building gives access, kind of breaks away the illusion of this comfort that was built in the Arctic. And so the coldness is invited then to your house, and you're affected by the cold air so much faster. And I think then suddenly people start realizing that this comfort that they keep imagining in the Arctic, it was really a very recent phenomenon and an illusion that now they need to rethink. And maybe that's also one of the things that is happening.
Thank you. Yeah. A lot of what you've brought forth of you has to do with this notion of rethinking, re-looking, re-listening, and taking another stand on the world we live in. So, the audience, are there any questions that you want to?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for all your presentations. I see that the four of you are impressed and really enjoyed the beauty of the destruction. And the images I see, also in the works of art, it's so beautiful, it's aesthetic. The question I have is about the sound. When I hear the sound, I close my eyes, as you asked to do, and I immediately had the association of the noises in the womb of the mother. And it surprised me that it was not one of your associations, because I think it's the most direct association I could do, that is really unconsciously bringing us to our very beginning.
We've had, so when the sound piece was first shown in that crypt I showed earlier, so you have to imagine you're already going downstairs into a dark space, so yes, you're not the first person to say that. You listen to maybe 2 minutes that are quite calm. Some of the parts of the sound piece aren't calm at all. You're listening to all the noise pollution in the North Sea, so there's a duality within the work too. But it's been very interesting to see how different people are welcoming the work. So I didn't notice what I'm going to tell you about firsthand, but I found out through Megan Guillemette, who's like the person in charge of the publics at the art center where the sound piece was shown. She did a visit with a group of young people who are on the spectrum of autism, and she was used to having a lot of young people coming from schools to visit the show. And a lot of the kids wouldn't stay for the whole duration of the sound piece. They would, stop screaming, or just like maybe sometimes they would draw, whatever. But they would stay maybe, for half the time. And then that group of young people on the spectrum of autism came, and they were completely calmed down as soon as they entered the space. And they stayed for 2 rounds of the sound piece, and then they started swimming into the crypt. So it's really fascinating to see how different people are responding to the work. And also because the teacher who brought the group was saying, oh, but I've never seen them this calm, maybe we should integrate sound or music into the classes. So this is all part of the research as well. It's something that's ongoing. And for me, that's fascinating because it really taps into human sensitivity, but also, you know, how different it can be from one person to another as well. Yeah, so thank you for your comments.
Anyone else?
I was just wondering, for your pictures, do you mean that you put the film in between like ice sheets and or sheets of permafrost and let it thaw? It's just like that?
Yeah, just like that. I place the ice on the... Yeah.
It's like a photograph, chemical.
More chemical. Photogram, you need light. Here, there's no light.
Yeah, so it's really like a chemical reaction.
It's a chemical reaction.
Any chemicals that are in the...
It's a chemical reaction, yeah. There's no light involved. Yeah.
Anyone else? Well, it's now almost 9 o'clock, so maybe we stop with this, but it was really fascinating. Thank you for your contributions, and I was very glad to get to know your work. It's very inspiring, and I hope the audience thought that too. So, thank you.
Words, thank you very much for who has fallen on YouTube or stream. At least we've got 5 people following us. And so I would like to thank Gluon, who hosted this event, and I hope that next time will be more some kinds of the interesting subject coming to the laser talk. Thank you.
Thank you.